Our goal is always to find the best thing for whatever human we're serving. It's about providing a great support system for them so they get to have independence. They get to see what home and financial stability looks like. Like, we don't ever want them to have to re-enter our shelter.
The voice you just heard is Lauren Skidmore. Lauren spent 5 years working as district director for California Assemblyman Vince Fong. She also serves as a member of the Kern County Planning Commission and the Kern County Employment Retirement Association. Prior to working for Assemblyman Fong, she was director of the Kern County Citizens for Sustainable Government, which is a local political action committee. Lauren grew up in the cattle business right here in Kern County. She's actually a fifth-generation cattle rancher and is still very active in the family business. In the fall of 2021, Lauren was named the new CEO of Bethany Services, which is the local nonprofit that operates the Bakersfield Homeless Center and the Alliance Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault. In today's show, we discuss what led her to her new role at Bethany and how she and her organization are providing services to and addressing our ever-growing homeless population. I think you'll find her matter-of-fact approach to this issue refreshing. She gives us some great insights as to what's going on locally with our homeless population and its outlook for the future. And now, stay tuned for the show.
Welcome back to the Our 2 Cents podcast, the show where your local professionals sit down with an array of guests to hear their story and impart some wisdom for both business and life-improving skills. This is your place to hear business and community leaders discuss relevant topics that matter to you.
And welcome to the show today. My name is Scott Hansen. Before we get started on the show today, I want to remind you to go on to Instagram, follow us on Instagram, send us a message for that matter on Instagram. Let us know how you like the show. We love to hear from our listeners. Lauren, thank you for being here today on the R2 Cents podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So I know we're going to get into everything that's going on over at Bethany Services, but before we go there, you're relatively new in this position. And tell us a little bit about what you were doing before and what led to your role at Bethany.
Yeah, so I'm only 3.5 months into my current role as CEO, and prior to this, I was the district director for Assemblymember Vince Fong. So we represented most of Kern County, Taft all the way to Ridgecrest, Shafter-Bakersfield border, Fraser Park, Tehachapi. You know, my job was to kind of be his local liaison. So when he was in Sacramento, I made sure meetings were taken care of. You know, we were getting all the information that we needed from businesses, industry leaders, constituents on what needed to be relayed up to Sacramento. So I was really boots on the ground, meeting with folks all across Kern County, trying to figure out what their problems were, how we could solve them, you know, how to tweak legislation or write legislation to support them. Really fun, dynamic job. We know about an inch of every type of industry and every type of job, but only an inch. And then you have to dive deeper into what folks need you to dive into and relay that back up to Sacramento.
And so had you done, Bethany Services is a nonprofit.
Correct.
Have you done nonprofit work before, or is this your first foray into this?
So I had worked for the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce for a little over 1.5 years, which they are considered a nonprofit. I did marketing and communications work for them. And then I did a small stint right after college with AmeriCorps, which is a domestic version of the Peace Corps. So worked with some nonprofits and did some community revitalization efforts outside of Fresno State. And then I also did probably about 2 years with a group called Kern Citizens for Sustainable Government. So it's like a local lobbying organization ran by some business folks here in Kern County. And that is considered a nonprofit too. It's a C6, but nothing to this size, nothing to this kind of real integral work into community services.
What led you to Bethany Services then?
Oh man. So Louis Gill and I had worked together in kind of the legislative world. Our team had helped him a lot in understanding all the funding that was coming down, you know, advocating on behalf of his clients and some of the things he was dealing with. And so we really got... And
not to interrupt, but Louis was the former executive at Bethany and had been there for a long time, right?
Long time,
for
21 years. Yeah. Okay. So we worked closely. I knew quite a bit about the organization, loved the culture. And so we talked a little bit about, you know, his departure and me applying. And at first I thought he was absolutely crazy. I'm like, I have 2 young kids. I don't have time. But there was a calling. There was kind of this weird pull. And so applied, had a great conversation with the board and felt the urge. And so here we are.
You guys have a lot going on right now at Bethany Service. So for those of our listeners who don't know, because I think it's a pretty well-known name in Bakersfield, but maybe you can kind of brief us on what services are provided at Bethany and what is it all about? What is the nonprofit about? And then we'll get to some of the things you guys have going on.
Yeah, so Bethany Services is the umbrella organization over 2 nonprofits. So I basically operate 2 different nonprofits. The Alliance Against Family Violence and Sexual Assault is one. So we focus on domestic violence support systems. We have like 24-hour hotline. We have therapists and counselors that support victims of all ages. And we have a specific program that supports children ages 2 to 17 that have been victims of domestic violence or sexual assault and or witness to it. And then we have, an adult version of that. We have 2 domestic violence shelters that are confidential emergency shelters, one in Bakersfield and one in Delano, which a lot of folks, unless you have had to experience the services, you don't know about it. So that is one nonprofit. And then the other one is the Bakersfield Homeless Center, which most people know about. And of course, with homelessness right now being one of the number one topics in California and in Kern County, a lot of people know what we do and some of the services we provide. But it's interesting. We're not just a homeless shelter. We also have, numerous other departments. We basically take people off the streets and we put them into homes. So we have a housing department that's pretty well staffed, probably 20 staff members in there, which people don't realize. We do a lot with identifying housing locations. So we have what we call housing locators. We have housing navigators, which help place people. Once they get vouchers, we place them into homes based off their criteria. And then we have a case management team that follows them from the shelter and follows them up to 2 years after they've left the shelter and get into a home to make sure they're supported, to make sure utilities paid, to make sure, they have food maybe in times of difficulty when they're adjusting to now having to pay for things. We walk alongside their journey with them.
That's nice. Seeing it through, not just temporary help, but more permanent help. So are people finding your services mostly by word of mouth, or they know where to look, or are you working a lot with government entities like law enforcement and things like that are bringing people to you guys to help connect you guys?
Yeah, I think over the last few years, there's been a real deep conversation about what the intake process looks like. So there's numerous entry points. Law enforcement is definitely one of them. They work very closely with Flood Ministries, which is a nonprofit that does the outreach component to homeless services. So they are the ones that are going into encampments. They're meeting people. They're identifying what their needs are. They're talking to them, persuading them to come and seek services. So we work really closely with them. They will bring clients to us. Of course, a client can self-refer. They can come to us. They can call us. They can engage with us at any time. And then there's other entry points, school systems maybe, or somebody that is currently housed but getting ready to lose their housing. Then their landlord might call and engage us. But yeah, I think it's funny. People think of just a homeless shelter, and we do so much more. We also have a jobs development program. So we have 88 members right now who are part of our jobs development team, and they are either current clients of a homeless shelter, former clients, and or some folks in the nearby surrounding at-risk communities. And we provide them jobs. We give them, a great minimum wage job with a little bit of leverage. And they're the ones you see cleaning up the highways and the streets downtown. We have some private contractors and, CRC, an oil company that contracts with us to help clean up their areas. And we provide jobs too.
And so with just having come into the position, I think you're seeing the position probably a lot like I would, or like anybody who maybe already runs a business, because you do have some experience doing this, but this area of homelessness and providing these types of services is relatively new to you. So what kind of insights are you getting, or realizations are you getting going in that you didn't know before? And then, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about some of the stuff you guys are doing, rolling out to address some of that.
Yeah, I think when you come in with a fresh set of eyes, you ask a lot of questions. Why do we do things this way? Why do we have this tension, or what is this barrier, and why aren't we trying to break it? And I think the team that was put in place, they're really good about being innovative and looking for solutions, because our goal is always to find the best thing for whatever human we're serving. It's about providing a great support system for them so they get to have independence. They get to see what home and financial stability looks like. We don't ever want them to have to re-enter our shelter. But we're looking at data a lot right now. So I have an entire data team on both nonprofits. Probably have 6 to 10 individuals that just focus on data. And we scrub through it a lot. We talk a lot about, how many did we serve last year? Why didn't we serve the same amount the year before? What has changed? What's not? There's a lot more questions coming from the community and coming from our elected officials of, who are we serving? How are we doing it? And is it working? We see a lot of people on the streets and folks are frustrated.
Yes.
And so we are trying to engage and figure out what the reasoning is that we're seeing, these increases, and maybe how our system, not just our organization, but the entire system is working, and whether it's failing, or whether there's just some other barriers out there that we're not seeing. So there's been a lot of conversation about what we're doing and if we're doing it right.
Are you guys coming to any conclusions about the causes of what is a perceived rise? I think it is a rise. I mean, I know a lot of people just speak anecdotally because of what they see. Like you say, more and more people on the streets. Are you guys coming to some conclusions about what is causing that and then maybe how to address some of those things?
I think there are so many reasons that we're trying now to figure out different strategies to address them. So it's all the ones we could probably all guess, right? Housing cost and
Sure.
just issues related to the housing industry is one of the main reasons. Whether it's lumber prices skyrocketing or just CEQA and all of these regulations hitting our developers. I mean, our hands
Tell
are
me
tied.
about it.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, come on, our hands
We
are
deal
tied.
with it every day. Yep.
We would love for people to build more homes, and I would love anybody that's in the affordable housing world, like, please build something and partner with us. We would love to be able to provide some support too, but it's just too difficult. And so that's a huge barrier for us because the federal model is to house first. It's housing first model. It's get folks off the streets and into a home, and then we'll provide support. That's not always the ideal situation for everyone. There are some people that we need to stabilize in our shelter, that we need to provide, kind of some 24-hour access to other humans that can support them. And that is some support with substance abuse and mental health. And so I know I've been in a few meetings this week where we are having very deep conversations about what substance abuse and mental health services look like. And I think our Kern County Behavioral Health Department, they have a new director, Stacey Kulhara, and she's fantastic. She's willing to kind of try new things. And I think they're going to pilot some new programs and see what that looks like in terms of supporting the homeless population. So to say we're hoping some of these things will start solving it, but there is just a lot of folks on the streets that are resistant to normal services. And so now we have to think outside the box. Yes, I think, there's definitely some release of inmates that might be causing some of these issues. Maybe not right now, like those that are being released now are not causing the issues, but, maybe in years past, now these folks are homeless or more visible on the streets. There's an article going around about methamphetamine and the chemical substances that used to be a part of meth has changed over the last 5 to 10 years. And it's causing folks to be more isolated, which before it was more of like a party drug, and now it's isolating them, which could be attributing to the encampments. There's just so many things.
That's interesting, yeah, and it's definitely a problem. So would you say that there is a difference between homelessness due to unemployment or just kind of ran out of money and just not able to earn, as opposed to mental health issues / drug addiction issues, maybe or drug addiction issues? Are those 2 or 3 separate categories? I know that it all gets grouped into, quote, homelessness, but it seems to me that you would address each one of those much differently. Somebody who's on some kind of substance abuse, that's the issue. It's not the homelessness. It's first, that's the piece that probably needs to be solved, as opposed to somebody who became jobless, laid off, unemployed in some way, and then just unable to pay their rent. These seem like 2 very different problems, but all being called homelessness. Is that a struggle that you guys deal with?
Yeah, and I think in our world, we don't necessarily call it homelessness the same way a general community member would.
Sure.
For us, our goal is to meet people where they are. So, whatever issue they're facing, whether they're a victim of domestic violence or they're somebody that has, 5 kids, they just got kicked out of their rental apartment. Now they're, in our shelter and they're trying to walk through what this looks like, also trying to figure out daycare, school, and all of the things.
Wow.
We just need to meet people where they are. And if it is a substance abuse or mental health related issue, we have to start asking ourselves, okay, how do we provide an enhanced service to support them? Unfortunately, those things are expensive, and it's hard to find medical professionals that can do those things outside of the world that we currently think about when we think of medical professionals. But we're having the conversations. It's just intertwined in so many different organizations and industries that it's going to take a long time to roll out the real solution.
It seems like it. And it seems like there's a lot of really smart people, such as yourself, working on the problem, because it has become such a high-profile problem over the last few years.
Right.
But I am, along with the rest of the community, looking forward to some of these solutions to it, and I think that it seems like this year and maybe next year we'll start to see some of the effects of your guys' good work. Do you see changes already happening? Do you think that that's a reasonable outlook is over the next couple of years that we could potentially see improvement, at least locally, with your guys' efforts?
Yeah, I think we have to ask ourselves, what does improvement look like? Is it a reasonable standard? And I would say, for the general population, reasonable improvement would be reduction of encampments and people that you see just on the side of the streets with their tent and their sleeping bag and, their dog on the leash and the shopping cart, is that the standard that we're looking at? Or is it legitimately, ensuring that folks have their bare minimum needs met? I think we can meet folks' bare minimum needs, but the encampment conversation is a little more difficult because these are folks that are resistant to services sometimes. Sometimes they engage, but then sometimes they just have natural human behavior, whether it's relapse, and they might come into our shelter, but then they decide to exit, they relapse. Maybe they try to go back with a family member, and then that becomes difficult, so then they're back on the streets a few weeks later. Humans are difficult, and we all kind of make choices and decisions, and so we try to be patient with folks, and I agree. I think there's an issue statewide with just folks thinking that living on the street is an acceptable lifestyle. I think that's due to, quite a few things, but I think systematically we have to figure out how to stop that and how to make folks feel comfortable coming into our shelters, how to make them, look forward to going into a home and what those services look like. I don't think that portion has been solved. I think there's too many barriers coming down from the state on the things I mentioned, housing, law enforcement, medical industry, and what that looks like for us to actually solve it within the next few years. But fingers crossed that something will come up.
Yeah, it is sort of ironic that on one hand, there are, even at state political level, a lot of asks like, let's solve this problem. We're intending to solve this problem. And on the other hand, in a lot of cases, the very same people are voting on laws that make the barriers to new construction more difficult, or law enforcement, their hands are more tied as to what they can offer in the way of services. That is a frustrating problem. And then you make another good point in that it's a tough problem to solve in that you can have these services available, but then having somebody actually take advantage of them or take the advice that you guys are able to give them, go in the direction you're leading them, is a whole other problem, isn't it? It's not something that you can necessarily force somebody to do. You really need to ask them to do it, and then hopefully they're going to follow through, right?
Right. I can't force anyone to come into our shelter and stay. There's 2 other shelters that are really focused on low barriers, what we call them. So they allow folks to come in with pets, property, and partners. So those are some barriers into like our shelter where we don't allow pets. There's a liability issue there. We don't allow partners because we're focused on families and we want to make sure that the kids feel safe. But there's other shelters that do have those. And even those shelters that we consider low barrier, they see exits all the time because, again, humans are human and they make mistakes and they want to, go back to a lifestyle that they know, and we can't force them to stay. And that is, it's difficult because I want to see change in every single client that comes through our door. Like, I absolutely want them to see the light at the end of the tunnel and realize, like, if you follow our path, like, you will have a life that is full and rich and vibrant, and we will provide you all the tools to do it. But not everyone chooses that path, and we have to kind of be patient. And I know it's hard for the community to see that because you see, I don't want my children raised, in an area where there's tons of people on the side of the street, and I have to explain to them what that is and why it is and what that looks like and how everyone could eventually be subject to that, but it's choices you make. But we can't force them to accept services. There's a conversation on kind of the substance abuse and mental health component of those folks at some point would make a mistake where law enforcement could engage. And then they would go to jail, and jail would force them under the confines of jail to kind of sober up and or detox. And there would be, some support, some medical support, but that really was the avenue. And that has been taken away under, California guidelines and legislature and votes and all those things that we just talked about. And so now what do we do? Now what is the new engagement with folks? And I think it's going to be a longer path because when you put somebody in jail, you rip the Band-Aid off and you're like, okay, you're now going to have to go through these very confined, strict rules because of the law.
At least you get a short period of time of some sobriety to make some mature decisions about what's next for yourself, right? Yeah.
And that is not the method anymore. So now what does it look like? And we're having to build the plane and fly it at the same time. So that's with, government agencies engaging. That's with service providers like us and others. It's a deep conversation, and we're trying. It's just going to take a little bit longer because that was that was a quick approach that solved a lot of problems, but it's over the last, 5 to 10 years, that's been taken away. So now we're trying to re-engage and figure out the solutions.
Yeah, and back to the sort of, on one hand, they're asking for change, and on the other hand, they're hamstringing the things that were working maybe, or the few things that were actually having some effect. At the same time, we get back in July 2021, Governor Newsom signs in a bill, $100 billion bill to, I think it's called Bring California Back or something like that. And some 20 or 30 billion of that is supposed to be directly allocated towards homelessness, housing, assistance to families who need it. Are you seeing any of that money yet? I guess it's been 6-7 months. I don't know when that money started to roll out, but at Bethany and at a local level in general, are you seeing those funds locally? And do you think that is having an impact?
Yeah, so what's interesting is there are millions and billions of dollars kind of pouring into our industry right now, federally and through the state. And I will say what's ironic is the state has more flexibility. So the money that we apply for or that we engage with is absolutely helping. And it is varying. It could help us just keep our doors open because operations of a shelter are extremely expensive. There has not historically been a lot of support from government entities to engage in homeless shelter operations. It's been from community support. It's been from, our locals being passionate about these people and these clients and engaging with just their personal dollars. But now we're starting to see some support. Some of it has been restricted to COVID-related funds, so we have to be mindful of what that is. A lot of it is cleaning supplies and masks and PPE and things like that. That is not helpful. There are large amounts of money that are coming into the more housing conversation. So I know that our housing authority has been able to renovate and revamp some amazing local old hotels, some buildings, some apartments, and really invigorate the affordable housing world. And that has been very helpful to our clients. We've seen some funds that can kind of be supportive services. So our case management team, that is helpful because we've realized that, again, these folks, they're at the bare minimum. So they just came out of a fight or flight situation. So they are like, do I have food, shelter, and, warm blanket or clothes? And now we're having to teach them how to go out into the world and kind of revive themselves. And that takes another human to walk with them. So case management has historically not been supported, and now it is. And that's very helpful. And I would actually say we have to grow our case management team across the board. I would say every service provider in homelessness needs to grow their case management team because it's just becoming more, initially it becomes very deep work where you have to make sure they're going to their doctor's appointments, those things that people don't think about. We have to engage in that for sustainability over time. And so yes, those funds are helpful. But of course, any government entity, they do a great job of identifying funds and then implementation is awful. I think they're trying to figure out a good vibe to engage our communities and engage our service providers on, hey, how should these funds be spent and what does this look like? But it's poor communication. And so we constantly have to be looking at our emails, making sure we catch on to the webinar that's coming up and making sure we're emailing folks and saying, hey, this isn't going to work in our area because of XYZ, because of these barriers. But that just takes a lot of work. So.
Well, and do you have enough autonomy to where you can run things in a direction that as a group and as a organization you have decided, or is a lot of that passed down from above or passed down from where the money's coming from, and there's some strings attached to that money that cause you to have to do things in a way that may not be as effective?
There's always strings attached to government money.
Okay, I kind of figured as much.
And again, that's why I have a data team of 3 and 3 on each side. It's a lot of it is monthly reporting. Sometimes it is very tedious and it's very time consuming to provide these numbers. But again, the public is asking for it, and so government agencies, especially our local, our city and our county, they have to give numbers, or else the public won't know that there's actually a response to the crisis. I understand the data component. I find data very helpful, but it is very difficult sometimes to meet, especially the state identifies as maybe the solution. And then they go, here you go, here's the funds, but we want it focused on this. But implementation kind of is left outside of the means of our voice and our community. It's always helpful when they process the funds down to our local entities because our city and our county do understand what's needed here locally. Of course, we're going to have different needs than LA, San Francisco. And I think that's something the state is trying to do, but it's not always the case. And so it does become very difficult. There's always strings attached and always some type of barrier in place.
I can only imagine. And so you mentioned growing case management staff and other staff in general. I know a lot of industries right now are having a problem getting anybody to come to work or apply for jobs. Are you guys also seeing that in this industry as well?
Yeah. And there's a few nonprofits in town that can pay more than we can. So a lot of our folks, they'll come and train and then they go to another nonprofit and get get, $3 or $4 more there than they can at our agency. We also have some diehards that have been in part of the organization for 15, 20 years. But if we want to grow, it's going to be very difficult. I think just finding individuals that are willing to come in at a lower rate and work really hard and engage with the population that we engage with, because there's sometimes some cross trauma there. A lot of our folks could have been a part of, a homeless environment in the past. And so having those deep conversations with somebody that's going through trauma can be difficult. We do have to have conversations about that with our employees, but I think hiring across the board is just difficult.
It's just tough. Yeah. Yeah. I think it is in so many places, in so many industries right now. Is our local homeless population and what we do see on the streets and around Bakersfield and Kern County, is it a local group that is relatively static here locally, or is there a lot of migratory people kind of coming through? Are you seeing a lot of return customers? Kind of what is the tone of the source of and original source maybe of some of these people who are using services?
Is part of that question whether or not the folks that are maybe homeless are actually from Kern County?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Because, I look at it like it could be worse. You go down to Los Angeles, right? I mean, I know that we see it as being pretty bad here locally, but you go down to Los Angeles and you hear the horror stories up in the Bay Area, and there are tent cities everywhere and things like that. So it could be worse. And I just wonder, are we getting some of that overflow, or maybe is there even an out-of-state component where there's people coming in from other locations because of California services, and we happen to be the place that people land? So yeah, are there trends that you're able to see from this data that you're collecting?
We have had some deep conversations. There's the Kern County Homeless Collaborative. So that makes up all of the service providers, the local jurisdictions, so city and county, and some other entities, healthcare providers and such. And that has been a conversation for many years, even prior to me being in this role. And Flood is a great example because they actually talk to the folks on the street, and they are not seeing that a lot of the population here locally is from out of the area.
Okay.
That doesn't mean it doesn't happen occasionally. I know in our domestic violence shelters do see probably 10% of our population from out of the area throughout the year. It's not common, and our populations are much smaller than what you're seeing on the street. But we kind of see some movement because of maybe who you're in a relationship with or where you moved to, but that might not have been your last residency. But the homeless population, no, I would say it is a local problem. Now, LA and San Francisco, because they're more tourist-related cities and a lot of, travel amenities there, maybe that's not the case for them. But for Kern County, most of our folks are local. And so we talk a lot about what's that causation, right? How did they grow up here potentially, and now they're on the streets? What is the cause? I would say we are lacking a regional component to discussing homelessness. I think that is something that we'll probably see over the next few years, is a more collaborative regional conversation of, okay, Turlock down to Bakersfield, or even Sacramento, Stockton area down to Bakersfield. What does this population look like? And is anyone seeing, low rates and or high rates? And how can we, move together to figure out what this looks like? There's been a lot of conversation about, the Amtrak stops in Bakersfield, and then you hop on a bus and you go down to LA. So are some folks maybe bringing the Amtrak down, not finding the connection to their bus, and then just staying? I think there's a small population that's happening too.
That's actually encouraging to hear, Lauren, and not that it's great that we've homegrown our own group of homeless. That's terrible. But at the same time, it does give me a little hope that if we can solve it locally, it's not as though we have to solve much more than our own borders, our own geographical borders. If we can just kind of get our area under control, we could see a real change potentially, because we don't have a lot of imports. If we could kind of solve what grew up here as a problem, right, it sounds like that would be more of a long-term solution for us overall.
Yeah, and my colleagues in other nonprofits might be saying this, but when it comes to our new development and where we're going to expand on the Bakersfield Homeless Center side, I want our new shelter to very much feel like a university environment. So I want there to be so many avenues of support that no matter kind of where they walk and where they go, they feel like they're still welcomed into this home, this environment. When I went to Fresno State, if you needed support in counseling, it was right there on campus within walking distance. And it was a question of, what class do I take next and why? And somebody would walk you through it. And or you may have, medical needs, and you walk right over to the health center and it's still right there. And you don't really have to leave the confines of your campus. And I want that to be kind of the vibe and environment that we create in our new shelter. I think it's going to take, all of our local industries to engage, whether that's education, whether that's healthcare, could be government entities, but it's going to have some type of services on our campus. And I think once we do that, just like any university, you get bought in. People buy in and they're like, I'm passionate about this. I'm going to stay. I feel supported and loved. And I'm not, I'm going to get my degree 4 years in, and then I'm going to go and do great things. And I think we have to start with that kind of environment at our shelters in order to then figure out how to create pathways for folks. And it might not be a degree per se, but it could be a job, and we have a jobs program.
Sure.
It could be that you're a mom of 4 kids and you just need a daycare, and you just have to get support so you don't lose your mind. And that, we have a daycare on site too. So I'm trying to figure out how we bring amenities to folks. I know our current shelter, I know we were going to talk about it, but we were purchased by High Speed Rail.
Yep.
So we are moving.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Yeah.
What's the plan? So High Speed Rail came and took you guys out, right? But now you have the ability to relocate. Do you guys have sites in mind?
Yes.
Are you that far along in the process?
Yes. So we actually just got site plan review finalized by the city of Bakersfield in December. So it's taken, a few years for us to get to this point. We have a site location identified. It's not too far from our current site, close to, California and Union, the Department of Human Services building. So we'll be back in that community. We have the property purchased, and we have an RFP out right now, and we are hoping that we will break ground this year. So we're moving, but it's going to be an interesting environment to kind of be patient as we go through this building process, talking about all the, housing issues. So I'm hoping, cross our fingers, that we will be in by 2025.
Okay.
I would love it to be sooner. I'm very advantageous when it comes to this. I'm like, I will call whoever and make sure we get, all the sign-offs and or all of our contractors will be available. But we really do need to move quickly because our lease is up in 2024 and 2025 with High Speed Rail. So we have to relocate. We don't have an option.
Yeah, so the plan is to go from where you're at to the new location. Does the site have existing structures, or will everything there be from ground up?
We have knocked everything down. It used to be, from what I understand, an old cement plant, so it didn't have structures that we could use, but everything's been knocked down, and we'll have to do kind of all the basic, grading work.
That's exciting.
And we will start fresh from the ground up.
Now, you had mentioned that a lot of your funding does come from local donors, and so I guess that's the case with this project going forward, right? And so about what percentage of your budget would you say you rely on for local fundraising or contribution as opposed to like government grants and things like that?
Yeah, so for this shelter, it will all be donor-related funds.
Okay.
Yeah, so we did not want to engage in a prevailing wage and or any of the other barriers that come with, some of this government funding.
More of those barriers, yes.
Yep. Which, look, they are giving money to homeless providers for these type of things right and left, but we thought it was important to really have local community buy-in. I also don't want the barriers that come with those funding sources, whether it's prevailing wage or maybe certain structural requirements.
Sure.
If we have a subcontractor or a contractor that can come up with an innovative way, whether it's maybe a modular unit for one building or, some creative tactic, like we want to put it on the table. We don't want to feel restrained by any type of development requirements. So that's why we really hope that we can raise the funds. We will have to do, a capital campaign to finish off the remaining funds that are needed. We hope we have a private donor in place that will secure. We have, the funds from High Speed Rail due to the buyout, but then we have a private donor that we're hoping will come through and help us almost get to the goal, and then we'll have a few million that we have to raise to finish it off.
Fantastic. Well, I like your matter-of-fact approach to just like, let's do this the way it makes the most sense, not necessarily with all the barriers and things that come up. So tell me about some upcoming fundraisers or things that the people can get involved in that you guys have going on that would go toward this new facility.
Yeah, so we are just starting to kind of announce the new location and get people engaged. We are also going to, I mentioned the 2 organizations under the umbrella of Bethany Services, so we are going to do an official merger and a rebrand, and we will announce that this summer. So we will have a whole new name. So that will take some time for folks to kind of get used to. And then we'll announce, hopefully, a capital campaign, sometime thereafter, maybe the end of the year or sometime next year, where folks can engage. I am available at any time. So if anybody wants to engage in asking just about homelessness or the clients that we help and support and what services look like, I can talk with folks. We have a website that you can visit. It's bakhc.org. You can always, call our office line, which is 322-9199. But I'm happy to be available for anybody that wants to either have a conversation about supporting us or just in general what the populations are looking like.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for coming on to the show. It's been a great conversation. We'll link all that in the show notes so people can get right to your email address or go to the website and find out more about your services. Awesome. Lauren, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This show has been brought to you by the Law Office of Kyle Jones, Troy Burton with the Lynn Company, CPA John Duffield, Scott Hansen Real Estate Lender, Broker and Investor, and Shannon Eckroth with the Eckroth Sales and Marketing Agency, LLC. You've been listening to the Our 2 Cents podcast. Check out the show notes for links and more information about the show. Also visit our website at our2centspodcast.com or catch us on Instagram at Our 2 Cents Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe